He's actually following Dave.
Good to go? Okay. Welcome to the special meeting of the Board of Directors on Tuesday, March 31st at 3 p.m. Roll call, please, Joanne.
Yes, Director Coverdell?
Now I'm here.
Vice President Glassford?
Here.
Director Reynolds?
Here.
Director Flint is absent. President Michelson?
Here. Any public comment? I'm not seeing any. Maybe we'll get some a little later. I'm sure there'll.
Are we doing it fine?
I'm sure we'll get some input in a minute here. Oh yeah, let's do the pledge. God, pledge of allegiance during the day. I'm used to doing it at night. Takes me back to grade school. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, so I'm really not going to be doing too much today. I would imagine most of this is going to be Dave and assisted by Mary. You're going to walk us through this?
All right. Should we, yeah, do we want to close that door? Make sure. Yeah.
Well, we get a couple more screens in here, we can get a bigger office again.
Well, I don't want to hear any complaints about not being able to see the
I
screens.
can read yours.
Yeah. I thought I was getting a little one. We tried and tried with our, this is like the third one we've tried, and, somehow they're not getting the message. I hate to have to buy a laptop to get a small screen, but that may be what we're forced to do. Okay, well, today is our budget work session. The board decided at our last meeting that you'd like to have a dedicated budget work session, and that's what we're here for today. Thanks to Mary's arrival, I think this is probably the most studied budget in recent history. We've really spent a lot of time on this. We know and we've all anticipated that given San Francisco's 31% rate increase and our decline in sales, we're going to be looking at a rate increase. And we really wanted to be able to understand all the pieces of that and to be able to present that to you and have you and hopefully our customers understand what we're thinking and what some of our options might be. And I think Mary actually prepared this PowerPoint. I came in thinking today's agenda would be to prepare a PowerPoint, and Mary said, well, I did a little bit of, I put together a few slides, and I looked at it and said, we're done. We're ready.
No one went home, huh?
Yeah, this is great. I really appreciate Mary's efforts on this, and my own limitations in looking at financials. I wanted to talk about what we really see as a time of unprecedented challenge for this district and every other water provider in California. And that has a number of factors, but the biggest thing going on right now, which everybody knows about in California, I don't know how you could avoid knowing about it, is our drought. However you look at it, it really has very little precedent in our records. It's the driest it's ever been. We're in the fourth year of a drought. I don't think we hold out much hope for the April miracle. We were kind of hoping for a March miracle. And we all know that California doesn't really get any rain between April and October, so we've got kind of a long dry season ahead of us. And if we go into a fifth year, things will be dramatically different than they are now, dramatically different and worse. But we're already seeing a lot of effects of this long-term drought. In Australia, the only comparable situation we can find anywhere in recent times is what they've now called the millennial drought in Australia, where these conditions similar to what we're experiencing went on for, I think, 10 years. So after 4 years, where everybody's thinking, oh, what's going to get better, it just kept going and going and going. And that led to some really amazing changes in how they produce and use and regard water. The other big challenge for us is San Francisco's water rate increase, a 31% increase. That's been in the news. That is a big number. And that about half of that was programmed timing of the water supply improvement program debt as the new projects come online. And the other half is due to reduced consumption. In addition to the effect of reduced consumption on SFPUC rates, we have our own reduced consumption. We've asked our customers for a 10% voluntary reduction, and overall, they responded very well. Our total production district-wide is down 11% versus fiscal year 2014 levels. Residential use is down 14%. So our residential customers, who represent about 60% of our water use and of our revenue, have responded to that call with even more conservation than we asked for. And there's a certain sentiment that based on how bad the drought conditions are, that some of these voluntary measures are just sort of rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. And I think based on the state board's recent actions and continuing drought, we have some, there's reason to anticipate that there will be further reductions. If nothing else happens, we think, even if San Francisco continues with its call for voluntary 10% reduction, this constant drumbeat of we're in the worst drought in history, we have to save water, will drive consumption even further down from where it is now. And these recent actions by the state board have increased the regulation and reporting that the district has to respond to. And that's going to cost us money as well. And as we'll see, when we get into some of the assumptions, sort of hanging over our heads in all of this is the possibility that the drought will continue, that it'll get worse, that we'll have to impose a mandatory rationing regime. And as we'll discuss, that would raise the level of challenge significantly beyond where we are now. So we just thought I think everybody knows about this, but the latest news just went into effect today. These new regulations went into effect today or yesterday?
27th, actually, Friday.
27th, okay. The State Water Resources Control Board, after sort of signaling for a while that they were going to do this, increased the mandates for local water agencies. Some of this won't have a big effect on us. These are some of the things that folks have criticized. New water use prohibitions, restaurant water only on request, and the hotels have to ask if guests want daily towel and linen changes. You know, as major water saving measures in a huge drought, those don't seem like they're that significant, but the fact that they're now mandatory, I guess we could take as significant. What is significant for us is now we have to mandate restriction of irrigation to 2 days. All water agencies have a mandatory 2-day irrigation restriction. I guess there's some alternatives to that, but that would probably be the case for us. So we'll be back in April with proposed modifications to our drought ordinance. We're going to be required to notify customers immediately of leaks that we know about on their premises. That's not leaks in the street, but if we detect that a customer has a leak, we're required to notify them. And then finally, of probably most significance for us, we have to report on compliance and enforcement. So there'll be much more data collected, and that'll be publicized. We looked for some data on how many enforcement actions had actually been taken under the state's first set of drought regulations. And statewide, were there, like, in terms of imposing the state fines, very, very few.
certain, like Livermore, that area was pretty active.
Santa
Dublin,
Cruz.
Severn Mountain.
But
Santa
overall,
Cruz, yeah.
overall, a fairly low level of enforcement. Local conditions, in some cases, stimulated water agencies to do more, but in general,
But that's what they've been saying all along, is that they don't, Department of Water Resources doesn't want to legislate unless they're forced to, because they feel that it's not one large bucket, it's many little buckets, and they want a regional solutions and regional control.
Right.
So they've been very clear in that message.
so the state could take yet more action to mandate. They haven't gone so far as mandatory rationing yet, but this is new territory for all of us.
On the 2-day irrigation restriction, it doesn't have to be the same 2 days for the entire district, does it?
No.
Okay, so it can just be any 2 days, however you divide that pie up. The
Yeah,
neighborhoods
we
or
have
whatever.
flexibility to implement it how we want to do it in accordance with our watersheds contingency plan.
Cool,
So, yeah, we have flexibility.
good, that's good.
We've talked about that, and we'll have an opportunity to talk about that in April. Basically, the more flexibility, the higher the enforcement cost. So here's
Here's the less impact on the district's production and utilization of the water as a resource. Yeah. Imagine if you had to have all districts go on the same 2 days.
Well, we've looked at that in the impact phase. Yeah.
Okay, well, here is a picture of what our water sales look like for the last 10 years, since 2006. And this is a 12-month rolling average. You can see that, as we all remember, we peaked in 2007. In calendar 2007, we produced well over 900 million gallons of water. In 2016, we anticipate producing about 600 and a little over 650, something like that, and with sales of 590. And these are sales. But what's noticeable about this, I think, is how quickly, when we had the drop, and everybody had a drop in 2007, 2008, it was our non-residential customers that dropped quickly, basically over the space of a few months. Residential has remained pretty stable, but in the last year, and since the call for voluntary reduction, which we put out in February 2014, somewhere around there, there's been a very significant drop. So the scale makes it look like not so much, but the level of residential sales that you see in the blue line in the middle is lower than it has ever been in the last 10 years. And that's a 12-month, that's a smooth average, that's 12-month rolling average. So those are very low numbers. And this is the sheet we look at every month, the 12-month rolling average. You can see on this that we finished fiscal 2014 with total sales of 700 million. And we project that this year's year-end sales will be about 620. So the number down here in the lower right corner, fiscal 14 year-end sales, about 700 million. We handicapped 2015 a bit by saying we think we'll drop in certain sectors and we'll go down to about 670, and it turned out that we went down to about 620, and that's the source of one of the sources of the shortfall. So these are really big drops in consumption, but in no way unique to Coastside. So here's what's happening in 2015. We kind of talked about this. Mary, why don't you
Okay.
describe This is your spreadsheet, I'll let you describe what's going on
What
here.
did you say you anticipate the end of this fiscal year to be?
620.
620.
So this is, this sheet is basically the sources and uses of our funds for fiscal year 2015. So we start off by having, planned revenue of 9.9 million, but with our shortfall in water sales dipping from 670 to 620 million, we're down 783,000. We do have some small offsets in our uses, reductions in costs, but not proportionately, because we are using we're using more of the San Francisco water and the pumping of San Francisco water versus our other local resources. We had a one-time revenue, that's the, we have the bond.
Well, that was
the
ERAF.
Yeah. and
ERAF.
And then we're dipping into our reserves to cover our uses, so 455,000. So in looking at our uses, we have, we have planned expenses, we have some savings, we have our debt service, and with our CIP, we had planned for 2.8 million, and we're estimate to close the year at like 1.971 or something. So that's how we're balancing out the year.
That's the proposal.
No, this is
This is
This
actual.
is actual.
This is
Okay,
actual. So the ratio of, we call it in this CIP, the ratio of CIP work actually done, which is sort of CIP plan minus CIP deferral, to CIP plan we call the Feldman factor. That'll come up later.
There's more Feldman factor.
Now, this is a visual of what I had on the previous slide. But our plan was actually to have a shortfall that would have had to be funded by somewhere. But we're looking at having revenue and, to cover our expenses and what we've ended up. In reality, we've had to reduce our revenue, and we've had to take money from reserves to cover the CIP that we have done.
Dave, how much of that CIP, the 0.9 million, is intentionally deferred, and how much of it is we just couldn't get it all done this year?
Well, when we took a look at things in about mid-year, I can't remember which meeting this was, I think it was December, we said, based on our results so far, it looked like we were going to fall about $1 million short, and the board said, we said one thing we could do would be to slow down or defer CIP projects. So we did that. So some of them were explicitly held. Our software upgrade, for instance, $200,000, that one we specifically said we're going to delay that. So I can't think of all the examples, but we did. There are always a certain number of projects that just don't get into or through the pipeline as we plan. And there were some of that. There were also some ones that we did for a while just say we're going to stop.
Okay, thank you.
So there's a combination of those.
It's the $455,000 that we took out of the reserve that's troubling.
Yeah, we don't like that.
Well, we often have, in many cases, planned. I think we knew we were going to be short, and I think we planned to take money from reserves. That was the shortfall.
So as we're looking out to the next fiscal year, we're planning on a continued decline in revenue due to the drought mandates. So our current budget right now is, we've pegged at 590 million gallons. So you can see in terms of with this chart, you're seeing where I've used just 2015 rates, so this does not include any increases. And so the red line is basically revenue, the green line is expense before any of our water shortage expenses that we want, we want to add. But you'll see that with, you're looking at if we were, still at 2014 levels of, we ended close to 700 million gallons at the end of last year. We are, we have some room to cover CIP, but as you start going down, you'll see that we start to squeeze between where we're at closing at the end of fiscal year 2015, and then where we're going down to 590 and the shortfalls.
Yeah, we tried a number of different ways of just
Like this.
visualizing the gap, the increasing squeeze as customers use less water.
Yeah, this one is just another view. We've included some costs for water shortage management expenses, and at 590 and 560, so you can see that the lines cross, and we have a definite shortfall.
So going back here, I just should mention that on an ongoing basis, when we're not in a crisis, we would like our contribution to CIP and reserves to be at least $2 million a year. I mean, our CIP averages over $3 million a year, so we really need to get that number up closer to $3 million. We can get through the CIP by borrowing money, because by extending it out, the debt service payments are less, are lower. But we think that probably the average ongoing district infrastructure replacement cost is in the order of $2 or $3 million a year. So the more years we don't collect that, the more we're deferring infrastructure maintenance and replacement that needs to be done.
So I'm confused. It's not unusual, but I'm confused at this point. On this particular chart, showing these projections, that doesn't include any rate increase.
Right. So that would be a
So what does it look like, for example, if we have a rate increase? Does the red line move? How does it move?
Those go up.
It'd go up.
Radically up or a little bit up?
Depends on the rate increase.
Well, so if we had a 20%, we're talking about 19%. If we had a 20%,
Yep.
does it start to balance?
With a 19% increase that we have in our proposal, you'll see a 1.3 million differential between the revenue and expenses.
Cool, so the line goes up by 1.3 million.
Yeah.
And so in those lines over there, those lines are $200,000 lines?
Yes.
So it goes up 6 of those lines, is that right? I don't know.
Yeah.
Is that right? Oh, good. Well,
But that's still, and we,
I guess I put the nitroglycerin back in my pocket.
yeah,
Except that doesn't include
we've got some better pictures of
more
that coming.
expenses for the water.
Yeah, is that
Yeah, which goes
in there?
You have to really look at the next one.
Yeah.
And you're really looking at the 590 level,
Well, there's
not the
more
620 or the
information.
700, so,
Right,
yeah, so,
okay.
Oh, I know there's another side to
Yeah.
this book, but I understand.
So our 2016 budget, which you have looked at, includes a 19% rate increase, and we just kind of plug that number in there. We'll talk about that in a bit. And that generates water sales revenue of $9.6 million, non-operating revenue of $1.1. Our total operating expense is about $8.6. Debt service, $824,000. That assumes a new borrowing of $3 million in the fiscal year. And contribution to CIP and reserves of $1.3 million, still well below what the normal rate needs to be. Some of the key assumptions here, and these are important to think about. We're assuming that SFPUC will continue on the current 10% voluntary restriction path. They've indicated that that's very likely. At least that's what they were saying at the beginning of March. We haven't gotten any rain in March, so their tune may change. The April 1st snowpack, the official DWR snowpack measurements are tomorrow, and those will confirm what everybody knows, that there's
Nothing there.
just nothing
What
there.
part of zero
Yes.
was tough, huh?
I'll
Nobody's
give you
ever
a personal review on that.
Yeah, nobody's ever seen 5% of the normal April 1st snowpack. Nonetheless, if you look at the latest from Bosca and our agenda for Thursday, where Steve Ritchie will again give us some cryptic things which we'll try to decipher, some cryptic predictions, but you can see that Bosca is saying you really need to get ready, anticipating that we'll go beyond this 10%. But this budget assumes that we'll stay at 10%. We're assuming that the water sales volume, as we mentioned, will be 590 million gallons, and that's an additional reduction of about 5% versus our 620 million gallons. And then cost increases are SFPUC water rate increase. We have not seen yet the untreated water discount they're going to give us. Depending.
Will it change?
Yes, it changes every year.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay, I didn't realize that. Okay.
It's not a fixed percentage of the rate. It's calculated by taking all of well, it's kind of a black box to us, but what they tell us they've done is take all of all the costs related to Harry Tracy treatment plant out of the rate.
We've just spent a tremendous amount of money on the Harry Tracy plant.
And we don't have to pay for it.
And,
Yeah.
right, and every place else. So that has, this year, I think our discount is 30 cents. Could stay at about that level. Our Bosca bond, because of our lower consumption, our Bosca bond surcharge, which is our share of a fixed amount of debt service, went up 23% over last year. I think it went up about 60,000, something like that, up to from 280 up to about 340. We're assuming, as we usually do, that overall inflation is 4%. That's kind of a long-term assumption. And then a major assumption in this budget is that, or a major proposal, is that we will begin to invest in anticipation of needing to manage our demand within much tighter limits than we have so far achieved. And we'll get into the details of that a bit here. So, we really have been looking at this a lot, but it's possible to simplify the arithmetic of water rates down to our costs are fixed and our revenue is variable based on water sales. And really rate increases when sales go down are unavoidable. So this displays, I'll let Mary talk about it, but this displays the fact that the costs are fixed.
the only really, variable portion is the water, which is in green. And even with that, again, we had some limitations because of needing to buy more San Francisco water versus using our sources.
So these are, you can see that what we call operating expenses would be exactly the same. They're, within small amounts, this might not be strictly true, but in essence, our operating expenses will be the same whether we sell 670 million gallons or 590. Our electricity costs, pretty much the same. They're somewhat higher at higher sales because we use more San Francisco water and we pump more from Crystal Springs. SFPUC water costs, when we used 15% less SFPUC water, our costs, actually when we sell 15% less, I guess I said it this way, our costs for SFPUC water are much less than our reduction in sales. It doesn't go down that much. It's proportional though. And debt service is always the same. And then finally, we say at 590, we'd add in the drought expenses. So that's it's kind of a key concept. We have, no matter how much we sell, our costs are basically fixed. But as we are required to lower our demand even below where it is now, our costs take a jump because we can't do that through normal measures. We need more enforcement, we need more monitoring, we need to go to monthly billing, things like that.
This just continues that theme of seeing that our operating costs are relatively fixed, but we have huge impacts with changes in volumes on revenue. And those significant drop-offs will impact our funds available for CIP and our reserves. So.
Yeah, we've kind of sounded this theme of fixed costs quite a bit. So one of the things that we've talked about the assumptions, but there are really some very significant risks for us here. There's a significant risk of further SFPUC action, including mandatory rationing, driving our sales down further. A second assumption that involves some risk is that our non-revenue water is about 6.6%. This number jumps around. It has changed. It's been as high before we replaced the El Granada pipeline. It's been as high as 13%. And we've had apparent numbers, and I say apparent because we don't really believe them, as low as 3%. We use 6.6% in this budget. If you were to take the ratios, if you were to calculate it based on the most recent 12-month sales and production figures, the number would be more like 10%. But we use 6.6 because that's what we put in the first budget we presented. So that would be, if we're off on that number, we have to buy and pump a lot more water to get the same volume of sales. So there's some uncertainty and risk there. And it seems unlikely that we'd have real figures below 6 or 7%. Those aren't too believable. We have assumed that district-owned water sources would contribute about the same total volume as in fiscal 2015. I think that's a pretty optimistic assumption if we get no more rain. If we don't get any rain, I think the first supply to go will be the Pilarcitos wells. Those wells pump from surface water in Pilarcitos Creek. If things get really dry, most of the water in Pilarcitos Creek is going to be releases by San Francisco from the reservoir and they don't release any excess. And if we run the Pilarcitos wells, we literally start to get phone calls from people downstream if we dry up the creek, which is possible. So it's quite possible, and we've seen it in the past, that we would not be able to get any water from the Pilarcitos wells. And then, of course, Denniston Creek, the flows are low right now. By probably the end of May, we'll have to stop pumping from Pilarcitos Creek.
That's what we're thinking, because
And,
the fire.
I'm sorry, Denniston Creek.
Denniston.
Denniston, did I say Pilar? Yeah, from Denniston Creek, and we won't be able to start again until it rains. So,
Aren't we by contract April 15th till October 15th? Isn't there a restriction
That's
on
Pilarcitos.
Denison?
no,
No
we have no
time
restriction
restriction
on
on
Denniston, only
When David doesn't need it.
only Dave Leah's senior rights. But those flows are going down. Dave Leah says he's never seen it so low. He's trying to think about whether he will reduce his crop acreage to match the amount of water that's available. So it's possible that our assumptions about district water sources won't be borne out. And certainly, we have always assumed that in extreme drought, we've always looked at 3 dry years in a row. Now we're in the 4th. If we go into a 5th, it's quite likely that those sources would produce almost nothing. But we've assumed some production from those sources. We've also assumed that we'd be able to acquire about the same amount of water from Pilarcitos Reservoir, and that's subject to some significant risk. Problems with our temporary pipeline, lack of rain, San Francisco operations we don't control can diminish the supply available to us from Pilarcitos, and whenever that happens, we have to pump from Crystal Springs and our costs go up. So those are all risks, financial downsides. It's kind of hard to find any financial upsides in this picture. I mean, if all of a sudden our customers were to start using more water, that would be a financial upside, but that doesn't seem very likely. And one of our questions longer term, although this isn't a big part of the current discussion, is when will water sales recover from where they are now? And how far will they recover? That's a question in everybody's mind. I think everybody believes that water sales will never recover, or will take a very long time to recover to their levels of, say, 2007. In general, looking at our supply picture, that's probably a good thing, but the short-term costs of that are very significant. The days of the head of Metropolitan Water District a couple of years ago famously said, the days of cheap water are over, and that's certainly, that we're reminded of that constantly. And when we look at all these risks, and in our discussion of, well, what kinds of assumptions should we make, we've also been looking at our reserves. And the district's reserves provide very limited capacity to mitigate downside risks. We've got about $2 million in total reserves. We've said that by policy we won't go below, well, about 1.5, because we'll have 10 million in operating revenue. But even if we were to make available that entire, we can't make available the entire 2 million. We need a significant amount of money just to handle cash flow requirements from month to month, the timing of when we spend money versus when we get it back from our customers. So we need a substantial pool of money for that. So we're really running very close to the bone on reserves. And in some cases, we've always kind of thought, well, we can do that. We'd be able to borrow our way out of a shortfall, but I'm not sure that's true. We really have to think about our ability to handle unexpected things. And we certainly have would find it difficult to deal with some major problem in our system. And I think in the long term, we really have to focus on trying to get our reserves up. Unfortunately, there's only one way to do that, and that's with our rates. So, but I think we have to keep in mind that, as we say, well, how much risk can we take? Can we shave the rate increase, whatever? We have to keep in mind that there are a lot of risks. They're all downside risks, and we don't have much capacity to absorb them. You see a lot of water districts. I mean, if you look at Alameda County Water District's plan, they're raising rates significantly, but they're also absorbing a lot of impact with a substantial expenditure of reserves. And that'd be a good thing if we could do that, but not in the cards for us. We have to keep that in mind. All right, so I'll let Mary talk about this big rate increase.
Hey, welcome to the district, Mary.
Yes.
Good timing.
Yeah. Oh, you can kill the messenger, right?
Isn't that interesting, the way it gets passed along?
So this chart, actually, it shows again our sources and uses for next year. So with a 19% increase, and that increase would be required to cover our San Francisco 31% increase. And also, we were including in the assumptions that we would be able to fund about $842,000 of CIP out of revenue. We did start out with saying we had $1.4 million that we would cover, would be out of revenue, but we're using a 60% factor.
Feldman factor, yeah.
And then we're also figuring on that we need to recover $455,000 in the shortfalls from this year. So that's where we're covering 1.3. We have a CIP plan. Then we had 4.4 reduced to get to by the Feldman factor on the uses for 3.8 million, and we're figuring that we would need to, in order to fund the CIP, we would have to get a loan of $3 million. Just in general with, when this whole look, we do need a minimum of 6% for a rate increase just to cover our debt covenants. But in this look, we're looking at 19%.
Yes, of everything. We looked at the full range. Let's say we hit our assumptions and everything, we would need, and we didn't do any CIP at all, we would need a minimum of 6% to get revenue up above our debt covenant minimum requirements of 1.2 times, operating revenue minus debt service. So that's our required coverage ratio. So it's a minimum of 6% to fully fund our CIP. And the rest of the plan, we'd need a rate increase of about 27%. So, we said, well, that seems like an awfully big number. Let's see if there could be reasonable measures for hitting something in between.
Dave, can you explore with us a little bit more our options and I understand that replacing a tank as an example, and I'm referring to the capital improvement, we can't just eliminate replacing a tank because then the tank fails and we have a problem. What happens if we do the tank replacement, we push it out 5 years? Could you talk us through a little about how the pricing, what happens then? And I understand that that burdens us because other projects like pipeline replacement, which wait for no one, would still happen at that time period. So I understand it increases our workload. On one thought I have on that is that if we are doing drought management, we would then have more staff that we've hired or brought on to assist with the drought. There was a money amount in here to have more people. Then would those people be able to help run the more projects that we have when the drought's over and we now have to catch up? But maybe you could kind of talk us through a little bit some of the ramifications or reasons why we can't cut more of the capital improvement during this time.
So we're not talking about cutting capital, we're talking about changing its timing.
Yeah, because a
Right.
pipe that's rotting in the ground has to be replaced sooner or later, so we can't just say we're not going to do that ever.
Right.
But it has to be done. So then we say, okay, but we have an extreme situation now, so what happens if we do it later? And perhaps if you could just walk through some of the thought process behind that, that would be great.
Well, we did sit down and we went through our capital improvement programs, or project by project. And we said, well, which of these projects can we push out? And we pushed out, I don't have all the details here to present, we pushed a number of them out, and there probably could still be more pushed out. We haven't really found any that would be candidates for elimination.
Which is reasonable. I wouldn't expect there to be
Right.
ones that.
But there could be, and we've said we will, of the projects that we're not going to debt fund. So we've taken the highest priority projects, including, let's say we've got a slide about that down here. We've taken the highest priority projects, including El Granada Pipeline, we're calling the Main Street Bridge project El Granada Pipeline Final Phase. We have
It
to
is?
get, right.
It's
So
actually
that's
Crystal Springs final phase.
right. So that, we don't want to say anything about Main Street Bridge. It's not going to be the Main Street Bridge. This is the Pillarcitos Creek Crossing, El Granada Pipeline Final Phase, the Denniston Booster Station, and Bridgeport Drive Transmission Pipeline. So we actually went through the CIP and said, for each of these projects, well, is it a project that mitigates a big risk? Or is it a project that has such an attractive payback that we should do it now? And the El Granada Pipeline Final Phase fits in the first category. The second two projects fit in the second category. Those are really important part of our securing our water rights, our local source water rights. And the more expensive San Francisco water gets, the more valuable our Denniston water gets. And if we do these projects, we can go from 400 GPM or 350, which is the Denniston rate now, up to 1,000 when there's water in the creek. So that's, those have a really immediate payback that makes it worthwhile to do them now. And then if you go through the rest of our projects, we can kind of look at them like that. I don't think we're mitigating any huge risks with the other projects, but for instance, the Highway 92 line, where we're constantly out there tearing out the La Nebbia fence and fixing, patching the patches. At some point we have to spend money to do that, and we've got some of that in there. I think if we were to say, well, so we went through that process, and we said, well, the result of doing that is kind of as we go along would be that we would only, we've got a plan of 4.4 million. We debt fund we debt fund 3, and then of the remaining 1.4, we defer at least 40% of those to future years, without really specifying which ones they're going to be. So it's a combination of deferral and, just sort of the inevitable delays and things like that, the CIP projects.
Since the 3 million in debt funding keeps coming up, what are the specifics on that? I mean, how
Don't know
many
yet.
years?
Don't know yet, but
I
we
see it
could,
twice, I mean, we're looking at,
we could do it there, I think we could do it as we did the Denniston improvements. Denniston improvements were funded over 30 years. It might also make sense to borrow the money over 20 years. Our model assumed that we'd borrow the money over 30 at an interest rate of about 4%, I think.
that's as good as we can get?
That's a little bit conservative in terms of, it's, our iBank loan for Denniston is at about 3.1.
Yeah.
The average cost of all the San Francisco debt, I think, for the WISIP is around 4. So it depends on how we do it. The projects we're talking about should be ready to build, which makes it easier to borrow from iBank. Although it does present us with some cash flow challenges because iBank, just because of the way iBank does things, all of our upfront cost design, all that generally is only paid for when we start to construct. So we haven't figured out how we're going to borrow yet. There's no way the district can go out and sell bonds for that amount. If we found a pool to participate in, maybe. Last time when we did the iBank loan, there was no market for bonds. There wasn't any way for us to do that. So we haven't looked into the details of that yet.
But the design has to be deferred, the reimbursement of the design, or withdrawing from the iBank, the funds, happens after we start construction. The shortfall is the vendors, basically the engineering firm that has done the design work.
On Denniston, we went back and refunded about $800,000 in soft costs that we'd put out up to the point where we started construction. And maybe, we'd have to talk to iBank about whether we can start. Now, I think they want to fund actual construction, so they're very focused on, well, do you have all your permits, have you done CEQA, all that kind of stuff. And for this, all those, we'll be able to meet all those requirements. So these seem like we can do a package of construction projects that should be fundable like that.
But we could conceivably apply for some type of a line of credit as the water district, right? We have plenty of
We looked at that.
for short-term money and then refunded by the construction loans.
Yeah, we can borrow, we can do short-term borrowing. It's pretty unattractive.
Sure.
We looked at it.
Always, sure.
And it has to be, basically, on the anniversary date of the line of credit origination, you've got to wipe out any balance.
Sure.
So if you open a line of credit in January and you borrow $800,000 in October, you got to pay the $800,000 back in December, basically.
There's always terms.
Right.
Sure.
Right. So, yeah, that's what you call, sort of.
Banking.
Yeah. That's managing your cash flow. Yeah. Okay, let's go back up here. Where were we? Okay, so.
One recommendation that I have is, I don't think that we've ever had, as a group, a workshop on capital improvement projects. And I think that there's always been a committee and activity in the committee level. But it probably really makes sense to have a board-level workshop in detail so that people really understand the projects and the impacts of the timing and all those kinds of things.
Well, last year we switched to a new format where Joe and Dave worked out a one-page per capital improvement with a diagram, a description, a cost, and a budget. And I thought that was really superb, and I want to compliment both Joe and Dave because I haven't seen that at other districts. So it was unique to what was done here at Coastside, and it was superbly helpful. And it's a big document to print out, so it isn't printed all the time, but I'm sure that if you checked with Dave, you could have a copy for perusal. And
I just thought, based on your question, you might like a copy.
I have actually read it and thought it was really good. I really found it well done, and I would applaud the effort. And I know it took some effort, so that's why I'm saying it was really good.
Right.
But I think we've been working for a while on exactly that. If you go back 5 years, kind of when I started, this CIP spreadsheet was all you got. That was it. There was really nothing else. And so we've tried, the detail sheets are an attempt to do that, but I think that doesn't, I found it hard in those to get into the kinds of details that you may want to have in thinking about, is this something we really want to spend money on now? Do we want to spend, so, I would be happy to do that. I think that would be beneficial.
Yeah, I don't disagree with where the capital improvement projects are. I think everything that's there and the timing makes sense. I think if we can afford it, we should go for it. So I don't have any issue with how you have it proposed or prepared, but I think sometimes it's difficult for outside people to have any level of detail, and what's kind of nice about filming it is, people can think about that as well. And I think it takes doubt away from customers who wonder, why are you pursuing such an aggressive, line of construction? And it's because the district's old. And there are a lot of facilities that need to be upgraded and improved and replaced because they don't meet quality standards. They don't meet health standards.
Ken, I think your comment is really valuable, and making sure that people understand that, and I think one of the best examples I can think of is the Pilarcitos Creek crossing, that's really not something that with a planning phase, a permitting phase, and then an implementation phase that takes a significant amount of time. We can't just shelve that for 4 years and say, oh, it won't break, then we'll do it. This isn't buying a new truck for the district. This is mitigating a potential serious, significant issue for us. And so I think that's the message that is so important, that people understand we're not buying new trucks, we're not painting the building, we're replacing infrastructure that's imminent failure infrastructure. And the costs of delaying that are huge and significant. In the Pilarcitos Creek crossing, we went over some of the costs of what would happen if that line breaks. We've also looked at what happens if we then have to double up our projects post-drought. We can assume heavy rains, which will mean our construction period will be wildly reduced. We've had an unusual ability to work through much of the winter for the past 4 years, but that will go away with restrictions prohibiting us from doing work during that season. So then we'll be in a real pressure to get pipelines that must be repaired, tanks that must be replaced, done in a very tight window. And doubling up those projects then means the management of those projects cost us significantly higher amounts of money. So I remember that last year and the year before, when we looked at reducing our rate increase by deferring, not eliminating, but deferring critical capital improvements, what happened was the cost to our constituents, our ratepayers, went up significantly in the future years. So when Dave changed the graph to show the changes, then what happened was we saved cost increase now and we saved money, but people paid for it in a significant increase later that ended up them spending much more money. And our interest is be good stewards of the rates and the expenses people are paying over the next 20 years, not just this year alone. And so I think that was the part that I took home from that, just to say I remember it. Can we take a 5-minute break? That'd be okay? When are we done? 5 o'clock?
We're done when you guys say we're
Yeah,
done?
we can hold it to 5, yeah.
Okay, all right, I'll carry on.
Do you want?
We're close to the end of our presentation, so beyond that, it's just answering your questions. But I think, I do think to address some of these questions about the CIP, it's really, we're spending a lot of money there. It drives our rates substantially, and it would be good to go into some more detail about why these projects are important and what changes. And I've found it challenging to keep track of what's going on with the CIP from year to year. You know, we do only spend part of the CIP that we budget, but typically what happens is new things come up. The projects that we plan are more expensive than, and take longer than we planned. So we have this kind of rolling thing. Just in trying to figure out the Feldman factor, and could we either plan more realistically for what we can accomplish, or if that doesn't do things at a sufficient rate, and that might be the case, then could we invest more resources to move the projects and actually get them done and shove the dollars out the door? I think that would be a very good discussion to have.
I think the biggest concern that I have is that there's a real comfort level about hiring and getting work accomplished. And what's happening is that all the workers in the area are becoming very busy. And so people are becoming inundated with work, and what that means is price increases. And if you assume that at some point the Fed's going to modify the strategy about interest rates, those are all factors that are going to cause the cost of what we want to do to go up. And, you know, what percentage will that represent? Will it be 3%? Will it be 5%? You assume 4 as an inflation factor. Is that reasonable? You don't know. I mean, it could be that a big boon and everybody wanting to improve their infrastructure might occur at the tail end of the interest rate conditions, and who knows, right? So I just think that as you're being conservative, which I appreciate, and as you're describing risk, one of the biggest risks that I see is performance and cost. And so when you add that factor into capital improvement, and then you start to carry that over time, you drive it forward. So I don't know. I mean, I've been involved in CIP for years, and I have never seen projects, well, the ones, you know, the ones that I've wanted to defer, and even those should be produced. I mean, it's not like they're stupid. It's just, you know, if you had to get water through a pipe or you had to talk about it electronically, you know, you make a choice. But I just think it's interesting, and I think that the district's so complicated. Most people don't understand how many moving parts there are in our water district. It's just different than other districts. We've got a lot of stuff going on that you guys get to manage. You do a great job, but the costs aren't going to go down, ever, that I can see. I mean, when I see these lines move like that, I don't believe that for a second.
Well, San Francisco is saying 31% this year, minus 2.1 next year.
Yeah, I can hear it. I'll be waiting for that.
Yeah.
I'll be watching that happen. When Calaveras finds.
Yeah, I was gonna say when Calaveras.
There's a big hole in the bottom. We
Yep.
didn't know we had to plug it to
Yep.
hold water. I mean, I could see
The
that.
Calaveras debacle.
The mountain tunnel.
Yes, the mountain tunnel where the concrete's falling off the walls of the tunnel, yeah. There's some minor
Do
difficulties.
you want to review this one, Mary?
Yeah, okay. So back to our slides. This slide just outlines where a 19% rate increase would be going. And so the first point would be the 9% for San Francisco Water. And the second point, due to the sales volume drop, 6%, you know, we're being impacted 6% as part of the rate increase. Operating cost inflation of 4%, we have our water shortage demand management expenses that we want to discuss of 4.5. The CIP line was, there was an amount that, we've had in the plan, but to get this up to where we would go to a 2 million historical target, and that was another 3.5%, with a subtotal of 27%, so we could be asking today for 27%, but we back down the CIP to, and that's where we've come out with the 19%.
This is really helpful. I really
And,
like this chart.
Yeah, it's a great job.
and then the next,
Well, where's our pie?
oh, there's the pie, yeah. Oh.
Oh, yeah, that was a sledger out of order. Let's do the
Okay.
pie.
So this is a visual of what I just said. So you can get, and you know what, I think the interesting part about this visual is really, we have, there's you look at the big chunk of what makes up the San Francisco water rate increase, which is, uncontrollable for us. That water sales volume piece of the pie actually would have been bigger, but that's where I've netted out the deferral of CIP. And then we have, the water shortage chunk and the operating costs chunk. But,
So the,
Water shortage chunk looks big.
so
Yeah,
the,
that's really big.
one of the things to think about here is that it's really operating costs that are under our control. The rest of this is either beyond out of our control, or and drought related, or required by, in the case of water shortage management, required by things that we don't have. We have no control over whether and when it's going to rain.
One thing that concerns me is, in order to get to the 19%, we're deferring projects, which I get, understand. But even then, even with the 19%, we have no cushion for should any of these budget risks actually become reality.
yeah, exactly.
And that
Well,
concerns me.
right. We don't, so we're not putting anything into CIP and reserves, right? So we would, and are we getting back the 455?
We're getting back to 455.
Yeah, we're getting
Right,
that back.
right, which is good. I'm
Yeah.
glad to hear we're recouping what we took out for this fiscal year. But, so I guess that's where we would have to go. We'd have to go back to the well again, pardon the term. Go back to the reserve again if some of these budget risks actually become reality. That's the only
Right.
source we would have.
Right.
Which puts us behind the 8 ball again, the next fiscal year, to replace the money we took out of the reserves, plus God knows what if the drought continues.
If
Oh,
the,
kick the can.
Yeah.
yeah, if the drought, if we had to go to, if we had to go to mandatory rationing, there would be, two things would happen. Well, first of all, in our BOSCA agenda for Thursday, there's the Tier 2 estimates. With a 20% San Francisco reduction, we'd have about 1.3 million gallons limit as an annual average. And so even at 590, we're using a lot more than that. So 1.3 million gallons a day is about 475 million a year. So 100 million below, that's below the level we now find painful from a revenue standpoint. So, if our local sources go away, getting to an average of 1.3 million is going to be very difficult. Not only going to cost us money, but the risk of excess use charges is also very significant. And where would we get that money? The only way to get it would be, if we get ourselves in that hole, and this will relate in a minute to our thoughts about demand management. If we get in that hole, we would literally have to go and basically assess our customers. There's no other way to get, if we run up $1 million excess use charge bill, there's no other way to get the money other than to assess our customers.
And that's a 218 process again?
whatever process we use, we really can't, we can't go out and borrow that money. We're in danger of being at the limit of our borrowing capacity because we're so close to coverage and we've got such low reserves. We're not, even though we can raise rates presumably as high as we need to, we don't look like a very good risk. But you're right, that there is nothing in our plan other than this water shortage management to anticipate the possibility that things could get dramatically worse. I mean, we are losing sleep over our ability to deal with that. We don't think we're going to get the news on April 15th that will be going into allocation on July 1st. And boy, if we do, there's going to be a lot of 20-hour days around here. But even then, it's going to be very difficult. And we need, in the future, we need reserves to handle that. Right now, we don't have much. So man, that's an excellent point. We really have, we don't have a lot to handle the risk.
I had a question on, coming back to taking on more debt. I was a little concerned about that, maybe making the case for a higher rate increase.
Well, that's what we're talking to.
What percentage of budget, what's the industry standard for debt versus relative to your budget?
If you look at the San Francisco projections of wholesale revenue requirement, 50% debt service. 50%.
50% of revenue to service debt?
We're not, 50% of the total revenue requirement is debt service.
Yeah.
Now, we have a total revenue requirement of, 9 million? 8 million? 8 or 9 million, and today, 350,000 in debt service on an 8, so we're not.
Honestly, I thought it was more.
10%.
I thought it was
Well,
eight.
that's what new debt service for the 3 million we're talking about borrowing. So I believe that any way you want to look at it.
What am I seeing here? I'm seeing 2006 bonds, 485, debt service.
Yeah, 485.
Yeah, so the 338.
Oh, I'm sorry,
is new.
800. Yeah, okay, so we've got 800.
So that'll take us up to 822.
Gets you another $3 million for
No,
CIP.
822 is what we have right now.
Yeah,
So
okay,
We have, that's okay,
then
we have
would add-
822 now.
We have now.
Yeah.
Then we.
And
So
3 million
that's-
will be at about another 150,000-ish,
Yeah.
so we'd put us up to about $1 million, kind of 10%.
Right.
So that's, 12% at $1 million, 12% of 8 million. So that's, compared to 50% of a revenue requirement, that's not, and there are other ways to look at it. I mean, you can look at debt load per account. I mean, if you compare us to our neighbor, we are orders of magnitude below that benchmark.
I'm just thinking, someday, when we're old, well, we're already old. When we're older and off the board, I don't want to be that guy that left CCWD in debt up to their eyeballs. I won't go there. But I do want to keep CIP moving forward. So, make it happen.
Well, I think-
So,
That's easy.
I'm not a big fan of debt. Yeah, right now, the Fed is probably raise interest rates. They probably, right now it's about the tail end of a good borrowing environment. But man, I don't want to walk out of here just leaving this district in big debt, especially when we walked in, you in particular.
Well, let's sell some assets, no
What
problem.
was debt? It was about zero when you walked in.
I don't think we had any.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't, I don't recall a lot of debt when I walked on board here, so.
We'd love to pay for it as we built it.
Yeah, that's kind of how I run my life, too.
I kind of like it.
One argument in favor, and I want to be really, really clear, I agree very strongly with you that one of the things that I find distressing is the debt service has this ongoing cost to the customers. One of the arguments that we should discuss as a board is that when you pay in advance, it basically means that the residents now are buying the pipes that their children will use.
That's the Kevin Lansing argument.
And when you borrow the money, what happens is then you're saying that the children will then pay for the pipes that you purchased. And I do agree with you that when I look at spending the money to pay for loans, when we know these expenses have to happen, there's nothing, that we've got.
Well, that's why I'm looking for, there is a certain threshold, I'll go to, but after that, it's like, I'm not gonna go any further.
The other concern that I have is what Dave brought up, which I think is really salient, that when our debt load is high, it makes us, in my opinion, much more vulnerable to an upset or an unplanned event. And if our debt load is low, then when something that comes up that is unexpected, a pipe that we budgeted with a 50-year service life, that pipe blows up after 10 years, sure, we may be able to go to court and fight it out, but we're going to have to repair it right now, today, and that expense can be very significant. So I feel that I would agree with you, Chris, that having our debt controlled and managed is really important, so that it would want to be one or the other, and have a large reserve in hand. But if you have a large reserve, then why are you borrowing the money? Why are you paying interest when you've got money sitting in the bank, unless you can work the interest so the money in the bank's earning more money than what we borrowed it? Hallelujah. But if we can't do that, then
You get in trouble.
then I think the alternative is poor. And so I would have to agree with Chris that I would like to watch our debt load for those three reasons, and I think they're important.
Thank you.
We look at this. So in our 10-year plan, we have two borrowings of $3 million each. And if the assumptions work out right, we don't add a lot to the CIP, then we're basically we're funding all of our projects out of revenue after that, out of revenue and reserves. Our goal is to get to the point where our operating net each year is equal to the average replacement cost of all of our assets. Not quite sure what that number is. I have a feeling I think it's around right now around $3 to $4 million. And I come up with that by saying, just back of the envelope, $150 million in assets, 50-year average life, $3 million a year. At the point where our rate base is producing that kind of excess, and we have reserves, we won't have to borrow. We'll be able to. And if you look at Contra Costa Water District, they're a good example. Big district, huge district, but they fund all their capital internally. They have rate increases that vary between 3% and 5% a year, usually a little bit increment over inflation. So whatever the real inflation is, they're at the point where they can just go a little bit above that and run stably, and they can take out of reserves to deal with temporary conditions that take revenues down, as opposed to raising rates. Right now, we have no choice. We can only spend less, borrow money, or raise rates. Is there anything else? We could sell more water. Maybe that's in our future, but that's been difficult. So, we've planned $6 million in borrowing.
You want to plug something in here?
Well, I just had a question. So we have about 6,000 customers, is that true?
Connections.
Yeah, 6,000 connections?
Yeah, around 7,000 services, maybe 800 or so are fire connections. So yeah, that's around 7,000 is a good number, 7,200.
So if it was 6,000, which I was using as
Yeah.
a low number, that basically means that right now, we only borrow $150 per connection. $842,000 is what we pay in debt service, right?
Mhm.
So essentially, each customer pays $150 a year in debt service in the current, at that $842,000 level. I mean, we've never really looked at standby charges or something like that, but a standby charge of $150 a year, $10 a month, $12 a month is pretty darn reasonable for, water connection to Crystal Springs Reservoir, locally produced water, highest level water treatment, possible, meet or exceed DHS standards, goodwill of all the water agencies. I mean, it's a pretty darn good value if you thought of each of those people having to borrow $150 a year and make a payment, of $150 a year to help in the debt service. So I think that those are the things to look at is, in a drought emergency, that's what's going to come down to, right? We're going to be the bad guys or gals or whatever because we're charging more for less use. Obviously, that's going to happen. That's going to be statewide. We're not going to be the lone ranger in that, right? And the second thing to think about is, if you really put it into the terms of what each individual's contribution might have to be to continue to provide the best possible system you can imagine in a very complicated environment. I mean, I think it's almost like a badge of courage. I mean, it's a great thing that we provide, you provide. We kind of look at it, but it's a marvelous job that you're doing. And it's horrible to take a hit on rate increases, but it's the reason why we talk every year about why do we want to cut the rate increase below what we need. It's just ludicrous. And, with a constant rate increase over the last 5 or 10 years, instead of deviating from what we need, we would have more money. We could go back and prove it. I'm sure Mary could show us what 3% 5 years ago would have netted us today. 5% 3 years ago might have netted us today. And so I think we have to be really, it's just the year to take the tough pill, isn't it? And I frankly think that 19% is being short-sighted. I think 27% is what we need. We've proved it. We got a new numbers person to prove it. And unless I see some reason why, those numbers or those assumptions are inaccurate, highly inaccurate, I think we're being poor managers by not taking the hit. It's just going to be a hit year all the way around. But what are you going to do if it's 2 more years of drought? What hit are you going to be involved in at that point? I mean, it's going to be, one of my favorite old directors used to use the word draconian all the time. It can be ugly. You can be showering with a friend and a family and a dog and a cat. There's be a big change going on. And I think, frankly, unless somebody could prove to me that the capital improvement projects are ridiculous or that we don't need $2.5 million in reserves or $2 million in reserves, I would need somebody to really give me a convincing argument that those are anything other than conservative and careful management. So that's how I see it. And I think, we go round and round and round and round. The issue is how do we communicate to the customers to make them understand that, probably better to take a hit right now than a double hit. Or what if we have one good rain year and then we have, 2 more bad years? That's just as feasible as anything else. So that's the way I see it, and I don't like it. I mean, I don't want a higher water bill any more than anyone else does, but I don't see anything that we're doing. I mean, there are a few things that might encourage us to consider, but I don't see anything that we're doing that's crazy or, not necessary. It's necessary work that we're talking about. It's not luxurious work.
Is this whole package on the website?
Yes.
Because
The staff report's on the website, and the whole package is on the website.
This isn't yet, though.
Right, this presentation is,
No.
You open it up, Casa del Mar, entire subdivision. Miramar, entire subdivision. A pipeline, these are entire subdivisions. Our voters, our ratepayers, voters, well, think of election, sorry. Right.
That's what you're thinking about.
Yeah, because I know it's gonna be tough to get reelected on 20, but,
Hey, I just forget that word entirely.
yeah, I think our retirement. These are our ratepayers. This is an entire subdivision of ratepayers. An entire subdivision. And that's just one page. Here's another subdivision of ratepayers. This is where it goes. Yeah. So, and I know some of these people in these subdivisions, and they're kind of tired of us chasing leaks and the asphalt, rising in the ground swells from a water leak. And I think we had someone in here last week who wanted something bigger than a 2-inch in front of his house. So, you know what? It comes at a cost. About $1 million a mile. Not $200 a foot. Yeah. Anyone else?
You want to talk about our water shortage, demand management, and we can go into this in more detail later, but we did throw this component in here.
I don't think April's over yet. I'm still counting on April, okay? So I just want to let that be known.
You still got your skis ready?
Hot waxed them, baby.
Hasn't taken the rack off
You're
yet.
gonna need some wheels. So we do have a significant chunk in our budget that recognizes changing times and our feeling that managing demand is going to be a new way of life for all water districts, and complying with additional regulations. So we have an additional position in enforcement and outreach. That's basically a field position. The question comes up, well, how, once we do restrict watering to 2 days a week, how are we going to enforce that? Somebody has to be out there checking and responding to our hotline complaints and things like that, and helping our customers, we're going to have tier 1 water rates approaching $9 a unit. That means that our customers are going to need more help than they ever have finding leaks, dealing with leaks, meter read problems, things like that. So anticipating where we would have to go, this won't be anywhere near what we're going to need if we go to mandatory rationing. And it's sort of like, my metaphor was, well, I'm standing on the beach and there's a tsunami warning. Well, I don't know if it's going to wet my ankles or drown me, but I don't see anything right now. So what do I do? Do I run? I look stupid if I run and no wave comes. But on the other hand, have you ever seen those pictures of the guy looking up at the wave? That's how I feel. So it's like, okay, well, this is kind of our comfort. We need to kind of start running now in anticipation of the fact that it could get worse. And all the signs say it's going to get worse. Praying for the April miracle aside. So these were our thoughts about how to start doing that. And then an additional employee for meter reading. We said a while ago that we're going to go to monthly meter reading. I think that's the way of the future. It's for cash flow reasons, for giving our customers the feedback they'll need for their more expensive water, and if we have to go to mandatory rationing. Over time, we want to transition meter reading into the utility billing department instead of sending our field people out. We want to make meter reading a continuous, basically a continuous activity, and transition it into the finance department and make it a monthly, put all of our customers on monthly billing. That's the way all water districts are going, pretty much. Now, will we ever do AMR? I don't know. But, we can do it. I think we could read all our meters with 2 or 3 people, do just reading continuously. That would free up our field time. Nobody wants to hear this, but maybe we could reduce staff in the field. But we can't see any way that we can transition to monthly reading by doubling the amount of time our field people are spending reading meters. I already spend a week of every month basically doing nothing but reading the meters. That's kind of our batch thing. So this would be the start of that transition, and then just the expenses that go with these. And we can talk about these in some more detail.
Could I ask you two questions?
Sure.
When you talk about the employees spending a week reading the meters, how many people is that? I mean, in a 40-hour week?
5? Probably
So
5.
it's
Five people.
Yeah.
So it's 200 hours, and we do that every single month or twice a month?
Yes. Then there's the rereads and going back over the next week, the ones that were missed, et cetera.
So would you say it's an average of 250 hours a month?
I don't know if it's that high. Let's just say it is.
Yeah, so 250 hours a month. So that's really, ends up being 6 40-hour weeks, right? So it's basically a person and a half every month to read the meters. That's, I mean, I know that it's not great math, but I'm just trying to get.
No,
a
I think
hand-
that's an appropriate.
Trying to get a
analysis,
handle on it. So I can understand that. I think that's a great use of time. I think that it doesn't take a very skilled, I'm not trying to be critical of meter readers, but I don't think it takes the most highly skilled human in the world.
Doesn't take a
to go
D3
do
or a
it.
T3 to do it.
But the problem is, we do it with two, right? One driving for safety, because a lot of the meters are in funky places, and somebody pulls the cover and somebody reads it, so it's really 500 hours a month, isn't it?
Well, I think
No?
the impact of that meter reading activity on our field employees and the compromises we have to make to avoid, conflicts with field activities. I mean, if we have all the guys reading meters and we have a big leak,
Right.
meter reading stops for the whole day, and these guys are working all night, and then they gotta go out. So, and then we often end up moving meter reading by a week because we've got vacations or some other field activity taking place. So I think the analysis you just did sort of underestimates the loss of efficiency in the field operations that meter reading imposes.
Ken, you're making
Well,
a case
well,
for
I think-
AMRs.
No, I think that it's just a great additional employee, period. I mean, what I'm trying to suggest is, I don't think that's just water shortage demand management. I think that's
Right.
quality management of current staffing. I think that position is an automatic. So I can understand that. I get that. The second question that I have is, how do you see that money getting spent? Is that going to be like we get an announcement from SFPUC and it has to happen in 15 minutes? Or is it going to be rolled in through 3 months or 6 months? Or is this a slowly building up process? I mean, I'm just trying to think of the financial impact.
Well, we're talking about doing this in any case. So there's no trigger for this. It's part of the plan.
Okay. And
Now, if
but
San
you'll spend that
Francisco-
money almost immediately, or you'll spend?
Well, we'll begin. We can't ramp up, immediately. I mean, we do it as soon after the start of the fiscal year as we can.
Yeah.
We're scrambling right now. Mary's focusing on this software. We're cranking up again. We're waiting for her to get here to really focus on the software transition that allow us to go to allocation billing if we need to. Ultimately, we're going to go to some kind of a water budget billing system. We've got, that regime will require very significant changes to our workflow. I mean, it'll be totally different from what our office folks are used to, and that's another challenge for Mary's function. So there's a lot of work to be done. If we could get a lot of that done within the next, or start to make progress on it within the next 6 months, then we'd be ready. We'd be more ready. Wouldn't be ready. I wouldn't use that word, but we'd be more ready if we go into allocations on January 1st than we would be otherwise. It'll be less of a panic for us. But that's where we want to take the district in, and we want to go to monthly billing. We want to transition billing, which is a really important part of getting the revenue we need into the finance department. Not that our field guys, do a poor job, but organizationally we have accountability issues. They'd rather be doing field stuff than reading meters and going and rereading meters and, hanging door tags and stuff like that. So we think we'll have a better product, by reorganizing that and putting it into into finance.
Yeah,
So
I
this
just-
starts that process.
I just wanted to be sure that, I think that the naming that you've used in what you're attempting to do doesn't describe fully or completely the value of what you're attempting to do. I think what you're attempting to do is a management scheme that has value that isn't drought-related. That's what I'm trying to suggest. It looks like it's a drought reaction, but it isn't.
Right.
And so I think it's important, but explained in those terms, they're very different than, oh, we just think we're gonna have to throw, $380,000 after fixing the drought. That's just another huge cost, right? But it isn't really that. It's better utilization of the field personnel, it's a better organization of the financial process, it's a better way to receive the funding that we need to make sure that we manage the costs in the district. So I thank you for making it bigger than that. I would rename it.
Yeah, we've struggled with the name. We have struggled with that. We called it, we think that, well, conservation has been a core function for quite a while, but we think that, it's conservation, not exactly demand management, but it's that. It's helping our customers use water efficiently and when necessary, applying and enforcing water budgets. So it's.
I think it's water service. I think you're just.
Kathleen did not
providing
like,
more service.
did not like it when he called it demand management because that has a particular, context and meaning. But that's, a lot of it is better managing, well, you're right. We'll think of something different to call it, but it's really better management of our asset in the form of rates. We want to get the meter readings right. We want to make sure we collect all our money. We want to reduce the amount of mistakes we have in meter reading.
Customer service.
I do, I just think it's better water service. I mean,
Yeah.
So presented like that, because when I read it and saw the impact on the budget, my first thing was, no, you don't need it. That's crazy. We can reallocate people, we can reallocate staff. There's no reason that we can't deal without this. And because that represents the 455,000 grab from reserves that I was going, no way, we can't, I don't want to do that. And, but explained in those terms, and I don't mean to interrupt you, but I get it. So I appreciate the communication.
I would still like an analysis of AMRs.
Well, it's $4 million, so borrow another $4 million on top of the 6, and you got it.
Maybe we got it. I'd like I would still like to see current number on it and current technology. How much has it evolved? I mean, are you seeing anything out there? Is it there yet?
My feeling is that it's close but not ready. And the big problem for us is we've changed our software, we have to put the meters in. You have to go back and rework them. So even if we pulled the trigger on it today, it wouldn't be in place in time for this.
No, I don't think we're gonna catch this way, but,
Yeah.
I mean, come on. There's 12-year-olds that could probably make an app where you could watch your meter spin right here. I mean,
No,
this is-
that's available off the shelf for the
Yeah.
meters we have, but it's, there's several components that using the data that you get takes staff time, and now that Mary's here, we have somebody to do that. But there's the cost benefit is limited. Some of the benefits that you get are a much faster response to work with customers on leak and actual daily use.
And going over drought allocations.
And going over drought allocations, so that's an enormous benefit. But the cost of that is yet again an increase
Mhm.
over what we're seeing. And unfortunately, some of the debates over battery life have been brutal. Some of the issues with the installations have been brutal. And so as we watch utilities remeter, replace, repair, the learning curve is still pretty good. And I think that what we have the tremendous advantage of learning as other utilities struggle with this.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I'm wondering. I mean, I'll let the other guys work out the kinks,
Yeah.
and then at some point, I would think we could adopt it. And the cost of those employees would serve that
Yeah.
debt to borrow the money to install them? And at what point will those lines, will the lines get crossed there?
There've been two parts of this that have been fascinating to watch, and there's a third part that I'll touch on briefly, but one of them is that the meters, we started by taking a conventional mechanical meter, which was a primitive, it was a 40, 50-year-old meter, and we put an automated meter readout on it, an antenna system. The newest generation of meters are basically an electronic meter that's measuring ultrasonically the flow through it. So no moving parts, much lower energy demand, but it's a whole new generation of meters. And I think that an awful lot of us are very excited that these new generation meters have a whole lot of potential. But boy, this is a first adopter, first replacer sort of technology.
Yeah, and we don't want to be there
So
now.
and we're talking a meter that we've traditionally replaced in a 15-year cycle. And so some of the early responders are seeing 7-year replacement cycles. And that's brutal from a manpower, from a labor. But that new technology really gives us a bright hope that, wow, it isn't just taking an old piece of equipment and putting a digital display on. Then the next part that's still being sorted out is there's two approaches. You can have meters that you drive by and get a readout, which requires staff to drive through the neighborhood.
Go to satellite.
Correct, well, not satellite, but they bubble up and they go to a big antenna. The installations increase in cost, but the part that's troubling is we haven't seen what the battery life is, because you're now talking much more. So instead of a monthly drive-by, this thing is bubbling up to the antenna and talking to it on a frequent basis. And so that's the next part, is yes, you get data more rapidly, but your battery life then pays for that. So that's the struggle. And
AMR has only created problems for us so far. So,
Yeah, at some point, that's,
right, and we think once
Right.
we get the right workflows, once we get our utility billing system, once the technology matures, we'll be able to look at it. I think that if we had, let's say, 2 meter readers, 3 meter readers, that we would need that many people probably to maintain the AMRs. I mean, the downside of AMR is, right now, if somebody covers a meter box with gravel, it may take us a year to discover it. But, that AMR is always talking and saying, hey, I got a problem, and you have to go out and fix them. So, we don't know about that stuff now. When we do, if you had to fix 10% of your AMRs in a year, that'd be 1,000, that'd be on the order of 1,000 meters for us, or 700 meters. And each one, so pretty soon you're talking about, real field time. So I think my problem has always been, as Director Reynolds said, that the software that achieves all these functions of AMR that you can sort of imagine, that would be really cool, like being able to tell, you send somebody a text message, hey, you got a leak. Or, I can see from your meter that you're irrigating when you shouldn't be, stuff like that. I mean, but the software just isn't there to do it, and certainly we're a long way from being able to integrate anything like that into our billing system, so.
Where are you going to put the antennas that are going to communicate on the coast? That's what I
we'll
want.
put new cell.
on the
Oh,
new
the
cell
cell
towers.
towers, yeah, right, that's starting. Yeah.
We can go on
Doesn't
Randy's
look like
cell
trees, the new
We think we can
landscape.
do a really effective job, with kind of the current procedures and technology before we go to AMR.
Well, I see a big opportunity out there for somebody to get these right. There's a lot of meters in this
And
country.
it's fair to point out that, PG&E rolled out smart meters and pushed a lot of this industry, because the companies that sell us the meters sell them to PG&E. The difference is PG&E is powering them with their electricity, with their system, and we don't have that. So it's a challenge.
Someday, okay.
Let me before we sort of go all different directions here. Let me talk about the process, the budget process from here, and what some of our options are. We'd initially thought we would bring you the 218 notice at the April meeting. That would allow us to do the rate hearing and approve the new rates at the regular June meeting. One of the things you might want to take a look at if we're going to, in applying this rate increase, we've been working with our drought rate consultants, really our rate consultants, to see whether it would make sense for us now to adjust some of our tiers, to have, we've always applied these rate increases across the board. It may make some sense for us to say, this group of users, let's say the people that use 5 units or less, we're going to give them, they're the ones who've already conserved a lot. They're they're the people that, are likely the folks living in Leslie Gardens, in their little units. Let's have less of an impact on them than we might want to have on folks that are using water in what's now Tier 4. I think we have some good ideas about how to make adjustments that would sort of refresh the conservation signals in our rates. As our rates have gone up and up and up and people's water use has gone down, our tier breaks may not be quite right. I think there's an opportunity to take some of the drought impacts and reflect those rather than in these consumption rates, which are volatile, incorporate some of that into a surcharge on the base charge. So we know we're going to get that revenue, and it's, if we sell 570 or 550 instead of 590, that'll be a piece we can depend on.
So finance?
So we have some
ideas and come up with something then?
Well, yeah.
Yeah, we have some ideas about that will take a little bit longer to develop. So one of the possibilities, I think, would be to put the rate hearing off until our regular May meeting. Come back and talk about this to the extent we're ready in April. Talk about it again in May when we approve the 218 notice, and then that would require us to have a special meeting at the end of June, as we did, I think, last year for the rate hearing and
Yeah,
approve.
I think finance should certainly look at all the.
Right. So we'd like to suggest that we do
makes sense
that.
to me.
Rather than just saying, let's apply this rate increase across the board. We've got some ideas about how to meet some other objectives and distribute it more equitably.
Yeah. Does that sound?
Yeah,
I like that.
So-
Yeah, let's
very
ramp
much.
it up.
Yeah.
Let's do it.
So we'll talk again about some of that in April, and we'll plan to have the budget, approve the rate increase notice and the hearing date at the regular May meeting, and then we'll have a special meeting at the end of June to do the rate increase hearing, the budget hearing. Okay,
That's great.
all right.
Good.
That's all we've got.
I like that, might give some relief to those.
Now, you got one more slide with the good news, or, come on, Mary?
We were laughing about that. Where is the good news here?
Don't you want, like, I'm here? Oh, my God.
She may not see that as good news yet.
Well, then we make 5 o'clock then. Everyone gets to go home, no overtime, so we're doing our job, saving staff overtime. Oh, you better fill out a green sheet.
Don't you think we need to hear about a new Feldman effect?
I think we do.
No, I just.
Bob, you're on.
Just a, I won't take this. I got a copy of, I read a copy of the budget preparation, and the information prior to coming and sent Dave a few comments. I'll just share them with you, and just for FYI, and as an independent observer of the water business. I want to commend you on what I consider an excellent budget package presentation. I had fought hard against having someone come in and do all the financials and stuff, but I have to say it's probably been a good thing for the district to have a person now that attends to that, because you'll need more of that going forward. than we did in the past. It was done well in the past, but this is the time when you have to start ratcheting up to deal with all the opportunities. And that was my other thought, was there's lots of opportunities and challenges for you folks. And on top of that, there's a lot of unknowns. And that's the biggest issue, in my view, is the unknowns. Opportunities and challenges are easy to deal with if you know what they are, but some of them aren't obvious yet. And so from that point of view, Dave's analogy of the tsunami, standing in the water, is that up to your knees or are you drowned? Have you drowned? And going to heaven, that's the thing that's not clear. I do think, having been a conservative about rate increases all along, that 19, 14, 10, and 6 in the next 4 years adds up to a lot of bucks. That's 50%, on top of doubling over the last 8 or 9 years. So I would always caution you to be a little bit conservative with hitting the public with these things and understand their side, which is this real money and it costs money, and just being a little conservative, maybe doing a little less than might be the best thing to do, because it'll provide all the stability for the future, is still important. So I think I was not happy with 19, but I'm more comfortable than I was, having seen what's on the table, and I think there's a good case. The one issue that bothered me a bit was the demand management, water shortage thing. I didn't quite get that. I think, though, that I would take the position that maybe it's best to consider it a water shortage, demand management kind of need, to be able to sell it to the public in a different way, because they all know what the emergency is facing them. And selling it in that context, and the fact that we need people to really understand who's using water, how much, and where, and making sure it's not being abused, is important, because that's what's going to help make the difference. And that's really a function that the state's going to regulate pretty seriously and cost you a lot of money if you don't do it. I would communicate that and sell that maybe as the rationale for this thing. That's my opinion, because that may give them a better sense of why this has to happen. 380K is a lot of bucks. It's like 4 or 5% on the rate. But, you know, you have no choice in some ways. The state has regulations that are going to make that mandatory. Number two, I think using capital deferral is good. I think the Feldman factor is like the Dodd-Frank amendment. I mean, it's good. It helped. It made stability out of all those derivatives. So look, you do have some reserves normally out of the capital, and I think it's worth applying that to the rate. I mean, and reducing it slightly, and I don't think there's anything wrong with that. And while we have risk, there's still some valid years of experience to show that that's always been a reserve and has been, you know, available. It'd be good to contribute more of the, you know, more deferrals and perhaps a little more of the reserves, but that's hard. I understand, but you got to make sure your expenses are tight as they can be. What you spend has to be as tight as it can be under the scrutiny of the public when they look to see if there's money being spent that shouldn't, since you're raising the rates like this in spite of the emergency. That's my opinion. And I think that's just make sure every buck counts that's being spent. The financial plan, I had a comment about the $13 million reserve at the end of 2024. I think that's pretty significant, and maybe that rate increase process should be looked at to keep it. You have to have reserves, but 13.5, 14 mil is pretty significant. That's my opinion, having looked at. I didn't see the model generating all the things going up and down when we cut them here and drive them down a little bit, but perhaps some modifications could be made, huh?
I was kind of hoping to see that.
Yeah, the model.
Sure, we would have
The
done.
dynamic model would help, because you could get a little feel for how this all changes as you change rates. I like that thing. That was cool. And we did make some good decisions looking at it. Other options, I think programmatic options that have been mentioned, which are rate analysis and tier structures and things that should be looked at for the people that may be really needing to have some accommodations going forward. I don't think enough has been said about those options and how they can be built in to this plan going forward to make sure that you're doing the right things with the tiering and the additive costs and people that are really trying and all those things. That's really not been presented, but should be discussed and looked at. And I think the Finance Committee has an opportunity to make some difference there. And then forward the mandated water reductions and penalties and people allocations, that hasn't really been looked at too much yet because it hasn't happened, but it should be. There's going to be allocations at some point potentially, and people have to start thinking about what does it mean to them to, have their water reduced and their bills go up, but then penalties if they don't obey the law. That's not, I don't know, it's not in part of this discussion, but it's something that's probably going to have to be looked at going forward. So those are things that might be looked at as well, because people that don't behave may have to pay the piper for it. And so I don't know how you're going to attend to that, but it's certainly something you want to think about. Those are my thoughts. Appreciate the chance. Just have my 2 cents.
Thank you, Bob.
And thanks for calling it the Feldman factor.
Well, we named 2 factors of Feldman factor. We named 2 factors.
Okay, anyone else?
I just have one comment.
Okay, we're running into staff overtime here now.
Okay, I just want to remind people one thing, and that is, we're talking about replacing aged infrastructure, but we're not talking about providing money to replace the infrastructure that we're currently aging. So you want to think in terms of what is the total value of the hardware of the district, and what is it going to cost to replace it in 50 years, or whatever it is, and who's paying that bill? And is it a reserve that's built up to defer and offset part of that? Or is it something that's going to come up as a slam when all these things age in 50 years? Because we're providing water, we provide a service that doesn't have a time frame. It's never going to stop as long as there are human beings habitating this area. So that's the thing that we've never talked about, because we're currently depreciating everything we own. And where are we going to come up with the money for that? So that's always my fear, is providing for that future, because hopefully we leave something that has a future, right? I think that's the issue for me.
Yeah, it's the most important infrastructure we have. Yeah. We could do without everything else. Thank you. Anyone else? Meeting adjourned. Thank you.
Wow, that Mary's amazing.
I was going to say,
Best
9 minutes.
slideshow